everyone, I'm Michelle Huie, founder of Vigor Stylish Compression Legwear. I am going to give a talk to you all about how brick-and-mortar stores can move their business online and provide an additional revenue stream for themselves by getting their business online. So a little bit of background on me. I started Vigor about 7 years ago, and prior to COVID, about 60 to 65% of our revenue came from brick and mortar stores, and around 35 to 40% came from our online business. And obviously, when COVID hit, we pretty much lost 60% of our revenue, like I know many other brick and mortar stores as well. Luckily, we did have an online business that was pretty strong, and it was something that we were already investing time, energy, and money on. So we were able to grow that pretty considerably over the past couple of months. But nonetheless, it was definitely and has been and has continued to be very challenging and can be really difficult, especially with shelter in place and still a lot of people not really going into brick and mortar stores to shop. And so I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of my retail partners, and some have done extremely well during COVID, and some have not, and some are not going to make it. And if I were to define kind of or create one main reason that really separates the retailers that have done really well with the ones that aren't going to make it, the main reason is having more of a digital online presence. That's a main reason why we've seen so much success with certain brick and mortar stores, is because they had already invested in an online presence and have seen significant growth in that. I think that this is something that is not just about COVID. This is obviously post-COVID as well. So in order for me to kind of talk more about this, it's really important for us to really understand what we've seen in terms of a shifting in consumer behavior that we've seen over the past 10 years or so. So here are just some of the headlines that we've seen pre-COVID. Macy's closing their doors, a lot of their retail stores, Sports Authority going under, JCPenney reducing a lot of their stores, Ann Taylor, Dress Barn, Loft, Lane Bryant. These are just some of the larger brick and mortar stores that we've seen, these big department stores that were already struggling pre-COVID. Now, the format of a lot of these stores have not changed in 60, 70, 80 plus years. But what has changed over the past 10 years that has caused such a big shift in the way people are shopping? And the one main component that we've seen is the consumer shopping behavior and the end consumer themselves. A lot of it really coming down to the millennial shopper. I know there's been a lot of talk about kind of the millennial generation, but it's really important that we further understand this generation of shoppers to understand why we've seen such a big shift over the past 10 years in consumer behavior. So do a little bit of background based on studies that I've read. The millennial generation, they were born between around 1980 to 2000, so a pretty big age range. So of course, a lot of this information are generalities. I'm not saying every single millennial has these behaviors, but I think it's really important to understand a little bit of why we're seeing such a shift. A few important things is in 2018, the millennial generation superseded the baby boomers as the largest living generation, which also means the millennial generation are the largest shoppers and have the most consumer dollars in the market right now. Something else is that they tend to have higher disposable income. This is, again, as a generation, they value the shopping experience. And this is something that we've seen with an increase in revenue for like Kohl's, TJ Maxx, a lot of those types of stores create this kind of treasure hunt shopping experience. And so that's something that they really do value. And even despite COVID, we're still seeing decent growth and decent revenues coming from those type of stores. And a lot of it's attributed to the shopping experience that they provide to their customer. They grew up with social media. I think this is a significant one. If you look at this generation, the people of this generation started using the internet and social media in high school or college. They were born into utilizing internet and social media. So this is really the first generation that's really started to utilize social media and the internet. And I think that's probably the one of the main catalysts that caused such a significant change in terms of consumer behavior. Highly influenced by word of mouth. They do want more of a customized experience with a variety of shopping options. I think one other thing that's really interesting about this kind of generation of shoppers and to the generation to come is that really the shoppers now really cross boundaries, meaning in the past, someone would either be a Macy's shopper or a Neiman Marcus shopper or a JCPenney shopper. Now, the same person will shop at Costco, and then we'll go to JCPenney's, and then we'll go to Nordstrom's. Really kind of that boundaries of where people shop is completely commingled. There's no more like, this is a type of shopper I am, and this is a type of store I go to. That happens a lot less when we're seeing this just across the board. They tend to value quality over quantity, and they love to support local and social causes. I think this is a really significant component, and that's really helpful for these small local businesses. So what have we seen over the past 10 years in terms of e-commerce then? So what does that mean for the shopping behaviors that we're going to see now and moving forward? So over the past 10 years, we've seen kind of a steady growth rate of e-commerce revenue and e-commerce sales relative to overall retail sales. We saw about a 1 to 2% increase year over year. But what happened with COVID? What we saw was a 16 to 27% increase in e-commerce sales relative to overall retail sales. So what we were expecting to see in 10 years happened in about 4 to 5 months. Now, obviously, once COVID is over and people are resuming to shopping at stores again, the idea is that people are not going to just go back to pre-COVID days. A lot of these consumer habits and consumer behaviors have been really cemented in a lot of people at this point now. It's going to probably go back a little bit, but definitely not to where it was pre-COVID. So I think it's really important for us to really think about what that means for local and small businesses and how we can really adapt to this changing consumer behavior. So there's a few things to note, and I think some really positive things that are going to come out of this as it relates to small and local businesses. A recent study that was conducted by Nextdoor Survey showed that 72% of people interviewed said that they would frequent local businesses a lot more often after the crisis. And this is really significant. And there's been some indicators over the past couple of months to really also support this particular point. Several indicators include larger amount of tipping. So people are tipping a lot more than they were pre-COVID. The next is farm to table. So really identifying more local producers of food and agriculture, a lot more so than they had in the past. Another indicator is the fact that those smaller brick and mortar stores that did have an e-commerce business saw significant success and growth in their e-commerce store during COVID, which demonstrates that their customer base still wanted to support them, even though they're buying something online and not physically going to the store. And last but not least is really just intentional spending, really intentionally spending their dollars on more local businesses. So I think that there is significant silver lining as we're seeing kind of us move hopefully past these kind of initial shock of COVID. So there's a few things that could be done to really create more of the omnichannel shopping experience. And as I just mentioned earlier, for those retailers that were able to invest in their online store and more of that omnichannel experience pre-COVID, they did see a lot of success with their online business during COVID. And like I said, this is something that really isn't going to go away. So what are some things to really consider now and to invest in from a resource, time, and money standpoint? Few things to consider. And the first thing is just making sure that you are on Google My Business. Really, really simple. You can Google My Business and be able to follow step-by-step instructions for just getting that on. What Google My Business really allows is for local searches. So if a customer is in your area and just wants to even know your store hours, it's very simple for them to identify kind of where you're at, what your store hours are, and have more of an online presence that way. And so that's number one. Most of you I know already have this. The next is social media. And so the two main social media channels are Facebook and Instagram. Facebook tends to skew towards an older customer demographic, and Instagram tends to skew towards a younger customer demographic. So a lot of it depends on who your customer base is, and that, depending on who that is where you're going to be investing your time and resources to growing the population and really feeding those channels with content. So it'll really help decide which one to focus your attention on. The next is your website. And this is really important because there are a lot of times I'll go into a physical store and it'll have a certain look and feel and essence when I walk in the store. And then when I go on their website, it's completely different. It does not reflect their store at all. And so it's really important that you consider that the time and energy you're putting towards cultivating the experience in your physical store needs to also translate to your website. So there isn't that disconnect from the customer standpoint that they are still shopping in the same place that they normally shop when they physically walk into your store. And then last but not least is really just building your online website. And I know that could be really problematic and take a lot of time and resources. But again, kind of getting back to where the customers are, meeting them where they're at, it's really important to start thinking about all the steps that are necessary to be able to create a successful online business. So I'm just going to go over some tips and tricks around how to either get started with your online store, or if you already have one but really want to grow that more. Hopefully I can provide some more information on how you can continue to expand your online business. So the first thing to really consider is your inventory and having an accurate inventory management system. So many of you use a system like ShopKeep or Clover, or if you don't actually use anything at all, that's step number one, is making sure you take stock of the inventory. Because when you're selling product online, it's really important to make sure that that's accurate. Because when someone's making a purchase on your website, they're actually giving you money before they actually receive the product. So the fact that they're doing that, you really want to make sure that you actually can deliver on the product and have just a great customer experience when they're shopping on your website. It's really an extension of your brick and mortar store. The next is identifying the right platform to be able to host your online store. So the two best ones, I think, for small to medium-sized businesses are Shopify and BigCommerce. What's great about them, it's a really easy system to use to be able to easily list products, create collections, and they also integrate with pretty much most inventory management systems. So if you have one that you're using already, it'll pull in the inventory directly into the Shopify store. So you're not trying to manage inventory in two places. You're not trying to manage it on your physical store and your online store. It's really pulling it into one, which is really, really important. Another big component of a lot of these platforms as well is they allow either curbside pickup or shipping. So this is something that's pretty new that both Shopify and BigCommerce have incorporated, is allowing the customer to choose whether they want to just come to your store to pick up product or if they actually want the product shipped directly to them. So that's a really nice newer feature that we've seen. The next step is actually listing and physically listing the products. What's great is that pretty much most of the brands that you carry already have photography and already have product descriptions. So it's just a matter of emailing them and asking them for that information. They should be able to get that to you pretty easily. A lot of our retailers during COVID asked us for that, and we were able to provide them with a full list of images and all the product descriptions that they could use to sell product on their own website. Next would be really solidifying and setting up kind of rates with USPS, UPS, and FedEx. Many of you in retail already know it very, very well who your UPS and FedEx and USPS provider is, and know them, probably see them every day more than your family sometimes. But it's really important that you reach out to your account person to see if you can maybe get some discounted rates, especially if you anticipate more sales coming through your online store. Next is having a really transparent and defined return or exchange policy. When someone's making a purchase in your store, it's pretty easy. They buy something, they're not happy, they come back to your store and they return it or exchange it. But if someone's buying something online and they're not physically in this area, how are they going to get that product back to you if they're not happy? What does that shipment process look like? Again, the key is really trying to create as much of a frictionless experience for the customer as much as it is if they were physically walking into your store. One thing that I'm currently working on is a platform called ShopDot, and it's a platform that allows brick and mortar retailers to more easily sell products on their own website. And it removes a lot of the operational headache and resources and money and time involved to managing your own online website. So this is something that should launch in the first quarter of 2021. If you have an opportunity and you're interested, go to shopdot.co and sign up, and I'll be reaching out to you to see if you want to be part of the beta test as we launch this product. But the brainchild of ShopDot has really come out of the past couple of months and talking to so many of my retailers and trying to identify a way that I could further support them and so many other brands who have been severely affected as well. And so this really helps bridge the gap between the suppliers and the retailers and really continuing to provide product to the end consumer. So ShopDot is currently in development and hoping to launch in the first quarter. So I have this saying, it's kind of silly, but I always say, if you build it, they won't come. And what I mean by that is, despite all your efforts and all the energy and money that you put towards building this amazing website, you still have to drive traffic to your website. So I'm going to go over some of the tactics that a lot of brands utilize to try to drive traffic and the right type of customers to their online store. The beauty of some of these tactics is it's not only for your online store, it's also for your brick and mortar store too. So there can be a lot of spillover and benefit overall by really understanding and optimizing each of these tactics. So the first is SEO. And SEO stands for search engine optimization. So what that is when you go on Google and you enter your search term, you see generally on the top, you see ads. So maybe the first like kind of 3 to 5 slots on top are ads, and it'll say ads. But then after you pass those ads, you see websites that show up. And those websites are called organic kind of ranking, organic ranked sites. That means that the content on those particular websites most align to what you're searching for. And this is, of course, determined by Google and the algorithm. So this is what Google really tries to do is when you're searching for something, they try to match what your intent is as closely as possible by delivering the website or the content that you're looking for the most based on what you're searching for. And so, their algorithm changes pretty regularly. But that's really what search engine optimization is. A lot of it is driven by the content that you have on your website. So for example, if I were looking for wine in Missoula, I would enter Missoula wine in Google. And the first organic site that comes up is Missoula Wine Merchants. And it makes sense. Missoula wine is in the title of their store. And also they utilize those terms, Missoula wine, pretty frequently on their website. And you know what? That's a pretty, good match. It's a pretty high intent that they were able to match a wine store in Missoula towards my search term of Missoula wine. So that's just a really simple example of kind of search engine optimization. And again, you really drive that through utilizing the right content on your website. And this is one of the main reasons why a lot of brands have a blog content and, create blogs as well, is so that they can really have more content where Google can crawl their website to try to search and rank organically for a lot of search terms. The next one is email. And email is probably one of the most underutilized platforms. It's really interesting because during COVID, the email open rates as a whole has increased relative to pre-COVID days. So people are obviously sitting in front of their computers a lot more and a lot more connected online, and they're actually opening their emails more frequently than they were pre-COVID. And depending on how many years you've been in business, you probably have collected a lot of email addresses over the past several years. And I don't see this utilized definitely enough with a lot of local and small businesses. And it's a great opportunity to directly speak to your customer. Obviously, you have to be careful with canned spam law and not overly spam your customers. And it's really important that you're, being compliant with how you're capturing the email addresses. So definitely keep that in mind when you're working with email. There's also a lot of really great, inexpensive platforms that you could use to create automatic email workflows. And it's fairly simple to use. Another tactic that can be used is paid social. I don't see this utilized as often for local small businesses, but it can be really effective depending on what your product is and what your audience is. An example that I can think of off the top of my head is I see this great video from a cookie store in Missoula called Crumble, and the ad kind of comes through in my Instagram feed. And it's great because it's not that far from my location. Scary enough, but they know exactly where I'm at, and they're able to target that particular ad to me. And it's definitely driven me to go in my car, get in my car and go to Crumble and buy cookies. So that's definitely an effective paid social ad, and one that I could think of that I acted upon most recently. Another tactic is customer loyalty. And I see that with a lot of stores where the more you purchase, you get points, and those points can be converted to dollars for future use. A really great example of one would be probably Runner's Edge that I can remember. I bought a bunch of sneakers from Runner's Edge a few weeks ago, and they reminded me of what I was able to earn in my purchase. And it's definitely in the back of my head is like, oh, I've got some money to still use in Runner's Edge. And it's definitely was effective. Another great thing that they did was about a week after I went and shopped there, they sent me this really wonderful customized postcard, just thanking me for shopping in their store. So it's just those little touches that really go a long way. That can be done obviously physically via direct mail, or it could be done via an email as well. So there's all these different ways to really engage your customer base. Next is SEM. which stands for search engine marketing. So before I talk to you about what SEO was, which is search engine optimization, that's when the website ranks organically. So you're not paying for it. So, for example, when you type up compression socks in Google, my website, Vim and Vigor's website, ranks organically number 5, which is great because every time somebody clicks on it, I don't have to pay for a click, so to speak. It just ranks organically there, which is really what you're trying to achieve with search engine optimization. With search engine marketing, it's different because you're actually paying for an ad space on the very top of the search. So when it says ads on the very top, those are people who have paid for that particular search term to come up when it's being searched. And so every time you click on a website that says ad, that brand or that retailer gets charged, and it varies depending on what the bid is for that particular search term. More competitive search terms cost more money. Less competitive search terms don't cost as much. And so I don't see a ton of search engine marketing utilized with small local businesses, but if it's a potentially right move for you, definitely consider that. Last but not least is organic social. So we talked about paid social, in which ads will show up and you pay for that. You pay for anytime anyone clicks on that particular ad. But then what you also have is organic social, which is just authentic engagement with your customers and the followers on your Facebook or Instagram page. So this is a great way to really showcase who you are, your personality, and the brand essence of your store. And again, that needs to also not bleed into your physical store, but it also needs to bleed onto your website and your online shopping experience too. So these are just some of the tactics that brands utilize to get their product in front of their customers from like an online digital standpoint. But again, a lot of benefits of this can come from pushing customers to your brick and mortar store too. In terms of which of those tactics I think can be most useful for local small businesses, I would say organic social, because it really showcases community and kind of the local component of the store. Search engine optimization, as well as email and customer loyalty. So I think those 4 are definitely tactics to start with. And the other tactics, maybe waiting after you've really mastered the other 4. But to me, those 4 are the lowest hanging fruit for local small businesses. So another thing that I really want to talk about is making sure that there's enough time dedicated to work on your business and not always in your business. And I know this can be very, very difficult, especially when you have reduced staff members and you're resource constrained, is finding that time. But spending that headspace to really plan things out a little further in advance can be really beneficial, especially if you are going to have an online store. And it's going to be very critical that you do that. And so it helps you really define your position within your marketplace's store, understanding where your customers at, how are they doing, and then also, again, meeting your customers where they're at and applying those tactics that make sense for your particular business. Generally, strategic plans could be 6 months to 12 months. Obviously, with COVID, I'll be honest with you, I've been planning month to month. I'm hoping, though, at this point, we are starting to kind of look 3-6 months ahead and starting to plan with a little bit more foresight. And also considering inventory buying too, right? That's definitely a component towards making sure that you're planning accordingly and providing the right products that your customers want, especially as new essential products are coming out of this COVID and post-COVID world. So I hope that you have found this talk to be helpful. I just wanted to share with you what I've observed over the past 6 months or so. And also during my interactions with some retailers, some who have fared really, really well and have succeeded greatly during this time and saw a huge amount of business, and also learnings from people who haven't and kind of things that they wish they would have done earlier. So wish you the best of luck and take care.